We were trying to get somebody from the Google Lunar Xprize, one of the teams, to come and talk about this, but it turns out they're really busy trying to go to the moon. And so they kept getting this thing, well, we could go do that, but then we couldn't go to the moon. So I had to say that's a pretty good excuse, you know, that for not showing up. And then we were trying to get somebody from the XPRIZE Foundation to come, and they were actually trying that, but we got overtaken by events, and that didn't work out anyway. So you're stuck with me. So what I'm going to do is, I'm assuming that most of you kind of know the basic idea behind that, or you probably wouldn't be here. So I'm going to kind of try to go over some of the highlights, but then kind of give you some of the backstory and a little bit of historical context for what was going on here. So Google Lunar Xprize, so right there. So what a lot of people don't realize is that that's actually two things. So Google put up the money, but the XPRIZE Foundation actually is executing the activity. So Google isn't running this, the XPRIZE Foundation is running it. That's why it's the Google Lunar Xprize. So, so here's the basics. You can only have 10% government investment, so 90% of this has to be non-government money. So the idea is that you land robotically on the moon, so that's step one. Two is you have to somehow traverse 500 meters. You can roll, you can slither, you can swim, you can hop, you can do whatever you want to do, but somehow you got to translate 500 meters, and you've got to send back high definition video and photographs to Earth. And if you do that first by the deadline, and I'm going to talk about deadlines in a minute, you get 20 million bucks. Now, for most of us in the room here, $20 million is a lot of money. But as Dennis said, if you're trying to go to the moon, that's not an overwhelming amount of money. Now there's $5 million for a second prize, there's $5 million in bonus prizes, so altogether it was $30 million, but the most you could win as a private company for coming in first was $25 million. So where did this come from? Well, from the fertile mind of a guy named Peter Diamandis. Now you may have heard of Peter first back in the mid-90s with a thing called the Ansari Xprize. So there was another Xprize, and that's the one that Burt Rutan and the Scaled Composites rode for 2 flights in 2 weeks of a suborbital rocket plane. So that was won in 2004 by Scaled Composites, funded by Paul Allen. That was a $10 million prize that Paul Allen invested about $30 million to win. So you could say, well, that wasn't a really great business kind of a thing, but there's some backstory there, and again, over cocktails and libations, we can go into the details of that. And a lot of us, when we first heard that, said the same thing is that wasn't enough money, and that wasn't really significant. But it really did start a firestorm of creativity and innovation. And when you look at it, there was about 7 times the amount of the prize invested in trying to win the prize by all the teams that participated, and there was quite a few of them. But in the middle there, one of the things around the year 1999 or 2000, there's something that most people don't know, and there was another organization that Peter was the CEO of. It was called Blastoff. And Blastoff was basically a private company that was going to go build a spaceship, fly to the moon, and land and carry out commercial things. And they got all the way to the point of actually buying a launch vehicle in 2001 when the whole economy kind of collapsed and the whole thing fell apart. But I think that's what planted the seeds in Peter's mind that this was a cool thing. And then when the Ansari Xprize was won in 2004, so the Google Lunar Xprize was started in 2007. So in the 13th of September of 2007, they announced the Google Lunar Xprize. Now, initially, the prize was supposed to end in 2012. So by the end of 2012, it was gonna go away. And there was another thing that if it took you longer than 2012, they would extend it to out to 2014, but you only got $15 million instead of $20 million. So if it took you if you couldn't do it by the end of 2012 and it took you till 2013 or 2014, you could still win, but you got filled $5 million less. So you only got 15 million instead of 20 million. Still a non-trivial amount of money, but so then what happened in 2010, they extended the deadline a year to 2015. And then in 2014, they extended it another year to 2015, but with the, and then they added in this thing that if somebody else landed on the moon before that, then it would go down by 5 million. So it got a little bit crazy there. And then in May of 2015, they extended it to the end of 2017. But to be still in competition, you had to have, at least one company had to have a launch contract in place by the end of 2016. And so that's what it turned out to be. To continue in the program, you had to have a launch contract by 2016. So if nobody got that, then the thing died. If one person did it, if 2 people, 3 people, well, it turns out that 5 people did that. Moon Express, Synergy Moon, Haikuto, and Team Indus, and then Team IL all had launch contracts that were certified by the Google Lunar Xprize folks as legitimate. Now 2 of those, Moon Express is launching on the, has got a launch contract with Rocket Labs, and you notice Rocket Labs launched yesterday, and it was pretty successful, but they didn't quite make it to orbit. So, and again, if you look at it, this is May the 25th of 2017. This program times out in December 31st of 2017. So frankly, we're kind of running out of time. The Synergy Moon is going with interorbital in their Neptune system. They have also not reached orbit. So it's a little problematic here. Both the Indus team are launching on ISRO, so that's a proven rocket right there. And Hakuto is piggybacking on the Indus launch, so they're going to launch on that same one. Let me give you a little historical context. Remember when this started in September of 2007, NASA was still going to the moon. So this constellation program was still going, and that whole thing. So a lot of these companies were basically counting on the ability to provide services to NASA as part of their business model, and they were using that to raise money. Well, then comes along, you know, the Obama election and the problems that were going on with SLS, or the Constellation program at that point, and so then they ended up canceling the Constellation program and basically canceling the moon and refocusing on Mars with the SLS and Orion. So that kind of took all the people that were going to the moon and kind of left them a little bit high and dry. So Rob Kelso, who's out there somewhere, who spoke earlier, one of the things that he did when he was at NASA, that he helped institute a program called ILDD. And it wasn't our fault. We didn't come up with that name. NASA, for some reason, liked that name. It's Innovative Lunar Demonstration Data. And so what it was basically NASA, for sharing data with NASA, NASA would basically pay money to these companies. Not a whole lot of money, but in the millions of dollars of money prior to getting to the moon. So that was one of the things that NASA did. The Google Lunar Xprize guys also did this, and in 2013, they announced these terrestrial milestone prizes. Because see, one of the problems with the prizes like the Google Lunar Xprize is you get all the money at the end, and if you don't win, you don't get any money. So you basically have to find a way to pay for all of this as you go along. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute, as while it's a challenge. So what they ended up doing is by 2014, they ended up giving out $6 million in these terrestrial milestone prizes to 5 of the teams. So that was it. But if you ask people kind of what their what their big problems were, you'd think, well, going to the moon is not easy. I mean, it's a long ways away, and it's you know, we haven't been there in 40 years, but I'm still pretty sure it's there. But technically, it's a challenging thing to do. But I think if you ask people that both the fundraising and the legal and regulatory kinds of issues are probably some of the foremost. And I think, you know, I've talked to several of the people that are running these teams, and they say that most of their time is spent trying to raise money. So that has been the #1 challenge. Now, if the prize had been bigger, would that have made it easier? I think so. How much bigger would it had to be? We could have an argument over a beer or a glass of wine on that one. But I think clearly this was something that sparked a lot of interest. There was 20 teams that actually registered for this competition. 31 kind of showed intent. Only 20 actually went and registered. And right, like I said, there's only 5, maybe 4. Not sure that Team IL is still in this thing, although they're still up on the Google Lunar Xprize website as of this morning. But it's going to be dicey to see if anybody can win. Now, the question that comes up is, okay, let's assume that somebody does win, then what happens? So is there a follow-on activity to this? I think one of the reasons that people put up these prizes is they hope it will spur a new industry. You know, Ortigue, who put up the Ortigue Prize for flying across the Atlantic, certainly hoped to, because he owned a hotel and he wanted people to fly in from across the ocean and stay in his hotel. So he put up the vast amount of money of $25,000 back in this was like 1917 or something like that. That did it, and that was good for 5 years for flying across the Atlantic. Nobody won it the first time around. He had to re-up the prize again and extend it, just like the Google folks had to extend the prize. And then finally in 1927, a weirdo guy from a place called St. Louis, you know, flew this plane called the Spirit of St. Louis, that was built in San Diego, of all places, from New York to and landed in France. So, and he was famous, and the world changed that day. So the question is will something similar happen if somebody can land a payload on the moon and win the Google Lunar Xprize? I know that's certainly what I believe that's what the Google folks are hoping will happen. I'm sure that's what the XPRIZE Foundation folks will happen, but only time will tell. So again, it's a piece in this puzzle. I think it did spur a lot of things, and then the technology to do this and a lot of this precision landing stuff that people have been developing, like with Maston and Astrobotic and Moon Express and other folks like that, I think that is going to serve us well in what we're talking about today and tomorrow as far as going back to the moon is. But we're not quite there yet. So the clock is ticking, and hopefully in a few months we'll know one way or another whether somebody wins or not.